Hello.
Hey there.
This might be a quick one. I don't see anything on the agenda, but we have a few minutes for people to add stuff if they're interested.
Yeah, start the 180-second timer for agenda items. Hopefully Rose is happy we don't have to talk about Pearl anymore. I saw the PR got merged.
Yeah, it got merged.
Yeah, congrats.
That's great. Thanks to everyone for the feedback.
That reminds me, I wanted to talk more about Pearl. No, shouldn't have mentioned it.
Not my problem anymore. Bring it up.
We're not allowed to talk about it until we have an OCI V2, and then we reopen the whole thing.
Let's go straight to V3. I think V2 is not setting your sights high enough. V3 at least.
True, true. Oh, another open containers has joined. It's Vince. Where was that other camera pointing? I saw your washer and dryer.
Yeah, it's weird. This machine's got a front and a rear. Yeah, oh, and it's reversed too. Weird.
Oh.
Yeah, I could give you a tour of my room. Occasionally, it'll pick up the other. Yeah, it doesn't matter. How's everybody doing today?
We can add the tour of Vincent's room to the agenda.
It is kind of bizarre. Like sometimes when you realize like this is your worldview, but it's exactly opposite of my worldview.
Yeah, we should have a meeting where everyone has to point their camera as what they see instead of us looking at them.
This is the only clean corner of my house. I can't,
Okay.
can't clean more of the house.
I do remember very early on in the pandemic when you could feel like the effects of everybody having to stay at home. And then SNL did that skit where like all the different actors, you know, players were like giving a tour of their house. And like, and here's that crack in this wall, and here's that pile of crap in the corner we don't know what to do with. And here's this other pile of crap we don't know what to do with.
Well,
I don't know if it rises to, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say in a very meta way, I'm actually I'm uploading last week's call to YouTube now. I realized I hadn't done it, but by the time we're done, hopefully it'll be up there for those that want it.
I was going to say, I don't know if it rises to the level of an agenda item, but I think the reference working group, the next step is a TOB vote. Is that where that's currently at?
Yeah.
That's what we said last, and
Yeah, I can't remember if we care, or I don't think the charter makes us, whether Amy has to like actually run a vote or whether we can just LGTM that issue.
yeah, I was gonna say, are we like waiting for a 2/3 majority of just LGTMs? If it, I have to review it again. Almost something probably feels like it probably has to be posted to list. and get enough
Yeah,
time over
right.
that window.
I think the last thing we did was add Umosi. That's the last time we did an official TOB vote.
If it needs Amy, I think you want to get it done this week or she'll be off next week.
Okay, yeah.
We do have the member summit next week, so I'm sure it's gonna occupy a few people's brain cycle.
True.
Another thing that I will not be at, but I will sit here and FOMO. Is Josh on the call?
From the charter, it looks like TOB elections have to be via CIVS, but everything else just says a vote or a majority vote or via vote, most votes.
Yeah, I think for Umochi, we just did LGTMs in the issue and then sent a thing to the list that it was formally approved.
Okay, I mean, if that's all we have to talk about, we don't have to talk about it for the whole hour, but I was just curious if that was moving.
No, I do have one thing that, since we have a couple of us on the call, that might be worth talking about, just because I've had it open and I made quick progress and then I stopped because I realized it was like having bubble gum stuck to your fingers. But do you have anything else on this topic, or you can ask about governance things?
To me, I have nothing else.
Well, on the bringing the yeah. Okay. I just had notes. So on the on the governance things, that we have a few files that are in the project template that some of the different repos have been, using that GitHub feature to like clone from the template. And so a few weeks ago, probably a month and a half ago, when Rose was asking particular questions of like the path to becoming a maintainer for various things, like what does that look like? And there's not quite a path of like, if you achieve this or that you become a maintainer. I think there's probably even just like a little bit of tease out we could do on some of those roles of like, actually using triage and maintainer, people that have different levels of delegation, and that'd probably be very helpful. Though in investigating Rose's inquiry and, to what extent we have anything outlined for maintainers, that it came into this governance MD doc that is littered about different repos and inconsistent across all repos because some were created before the time of the project template. And then some of them, after having cloned from the project template, made slight adjustments to their own projects, like maybe even like voting constraints, because it inherited from like a top level, something that was originally intended probably for specs of like 2/3 majority, but something like the runtimes tool didn't need 2/3 majority for certain like tagging a release or something like that. So they made independent, like varied changes. And so basically I realized that I was starting to unwind that template's direction by moving governance entirely into something like what I thought used to be org, but now it's a .github repo. So it probably makes more sense to move it into TOB repo to have like top level, like organizational governance kind of document rather than some thing that gets arbitrarily scattered across all the different repos. Anyhow, I think it's actually pretty sloppy and it's a mess and I want to clean it up. But as I found myself sitting there with like bubble gums stuck to all my fingers across all the different repos, I figured I'd stop and then reassess the situation and actually talk to others about it. Does anybody have strong feelings on like where governance.md would actually would or should live? Should it be in each repo, or should they just link to a unified document and then allow themselves to make slight variations on things like the wording allow for them to change the tagging or voting or whatever?
So the different specs have different governance models? Is that what am I understanding that right?
Effectively, they shouldn't. They shouldn't, but the way that this is kind of trickled out is almost as if they've allowed that. There are certain things that should be consistent across them. There are places where there should be like allowable for some kind of like variations of like stating whether or not they have quorum. You know, like I think it's important for the specs to say that they have 2/3 majority quorum, and maybe some of the like Go Digest doesn't need 2/3 majority quorum, but that's not. That's like if there was one governance doc and it kind of allowed people to say this is what we're based on, but we have, because this is not a spec, we have looser quorum rules or something like that. So it's currently confusing whether or not governance is up to each repo versus everything in the org.
Yeah, I think if there's overlap between governance in, the three specs have mostly the same governance, I think there should be one governance document, and then within the three specs, they can have some sort of thing in the README that says, we follow this main governance with the exception of X, and it can list the unique governance requirements for that spec. Because otherwise I think it just leads to, copy and paste errors or missed updates,
Yep.
a lot of fragmented information.
So I dropped this in the chat, but if I'm remembering the history correctly, the intention was that the TOB would not specify governance and that each individual OCI project would be in control of that. And that the project template that you're talking about was just sort of a base suggestion, and each set of project maintainers could choose what parts of that they wanted to follow and what parts they didn't. I don't know if we want to change that now, but that's what I'm remembering, and maybe that's not an accurate memory, but that's what I have in my head.
Mm-hmm. I know that the
Is there-
TOB is not the one that sets the TOB is not the one that to set the governance per se, and that's why I didn't originally want to put it in the TOB repo. Because there were some things that were just kind of like organizational for like all of,
What is the
OCI.
advantage of having each OCI project determine individual governance? Like where would the differences be there? I guess I'm struggling to see how that would be advantageous. Because when I think of governance, I think of like, just like the general process and community roles. So defining what a maintainer is, describing how decisions are made. And I think, referencing the code of conduct, generally that would be the same. And if there's differences, then each project can specify. But it seems like there should be some commonalities between projects, right, for governance.
yeah.
I do want to say here, I'm not arguing that it should be one way or another way. I'm just trying to remember the history of why it is that it is today.
Okay.
And like if you go to the charter itself is the OCI charter. And it's like the charter.md that lives currently in the TOB repo, which is not to mean that the TOB, well, anyhow, it lives in the TOB repo. But if you go to like the opencontainers.org and click on the charter, it points you to that thing. That is technically the organizational governance model across all OCI projects. Then there's this governance.md that gets into more project level. Maybe it just should be called project governance, of like how that particular project handles quorum and stuff like that. But there's some of the stuff in there like about handling security issues and whatnot that probably is not project level.
So it looks like Mike just dropped a link and a quote from the charter into the chat that seems relevant there.
So then this governance should probably be, anywhere that it exists on repos should be like project governance, and it will be a flurry of PRs, but to make sure that anything that they have in their project governance is not effectively duplicating anything that's truly an OCI level thing, like how to handle security, security issues or whatnot.
Yeah, Vince, I think the idea for horizontal issues like what you're mentioning there, I think it would be fair to have a link back from all the projects pointing to that, some kind of horizontal thing that we all agree at each project level. But like you said, we need to modify the governance MD for each project, to point to some, horizontal security policy or something to that effect.
Mm-hmm.
Because yeah, I mean, some projects might in fact want to have a different security policy. So you'd have to work it out with the maintainers, I think was the original point. And if they're not doing it correctly, then it would be up to the TOB to come in and try to assess and fix any issues that aren't being handled by the project maintainers.
And how to handle security issues sounds less like governance and more like just general processes
Right.
of the project. And like usually in a governance document, there's just, is it lazy consensus for making decisions? Is it maintainers, a certain amount of maintainers that need to sign off? Like,
Yep. Okay, well, it sounds like there's a couple of things out of here, but I do think I think there's a need for a flurry of PRs, and maybe this shouldn't go back into the TOB repo. Not in the TOB repo, but call it, maybe just renaming the files also like project governance rather than governance. And then the things like security and, you know, like you said, horizontal should just be a link out to here's the security process across OCI. And then also one other kind of like side thing that is, I think we've touched on this in a few different times and ways, but I could almost see this as being some kind of like little, you know, almost like the build failed kind of badges, but like, is this project actually considered a spec or a code repo or whatnot? Because it could even be that we end up like unifying at some kind of top level of like, specs have this kind of quorum expectations and voting expectations. And if it's a code level repo, then it probably has, you know, a pretty standard other set process, like 2 LGTMs, and doesn't need a time window to get tags, you know, releases made and whatnot. Like, so if we just had like a badge on every project or whatever, some way of saying like, no, this project is definitely a spec and this project is definitely code or not spec, then they fall into 2 different categories of like quorum and voting.
Yeah, that'd be cool. I don't think any of the projects would refuse those pull requests to the README, right? To add those badges. Makes sense.
Sure.
They should already have that sort of text in their READMEs to explain.
It's just not consistent. If you have to like skim and not pick it up the
I
same way, then
agree.
it's-
Yeah, little flags would be, yeah, something consistent.
But all that to say that it effectively in all of this is just a hairball that needed to be sorted out, but it's still not a clear maintainer path of progression to answer your original request, Rose, which still probably needs to be teased out and probably pretty clear of like, it might fall into the same kind of like 2 buckets of like specs conversation versus code. And then also I think it'd be beneficial to start kind of breaking out and saying like triager and other things of like folks who can help sort and tag and label and LGTM and review stuff that are given more weight and otherwise that has a path of progression. I really like that a lot. Just, I think I got kind of stymied at seeing this other hairball to have to clarify.
Yeah, that makes sense. I don't know of any of our projects that currently have some, you know, restriction limit, like you have to have done 30 PRs or anything like that. I think it's mostly just, you know, the maintainers have communication with this person, and one of the maintainers wants to promote this person to either reviewer or maintainer status, and you know, then a vote ensues. That's generally the way we handle it, I think.
Yeah.
That might seem a little arbitrary, but
It is very arbitrary, but and that's where there was like
but then
some amount
you get
of
into situations
language around it, but it's not clear.
yeah, I mean, then you get into situations where when you try to be less arbitrary, okay, well, who reviewed his PRs, and you know, were they doc only, and is that good enough? And you know,
And we've definitely had some of the situations where folks never opened a PR, but it was because they were using the stuff in production, and it was like constant feedback, and and it was, you know, whether, you know, and flip wise, where some folks were not using it in production in their job or otherwise, or work company.
Yeah, I think one of the things I was hoping
we're wildly diligent in keeping it cleaned up and consistent and linking and whatnot, and like 2 different ends of the spectrum, and trying to codify that was, you know, yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things we're hoping that the TOB might be able to help us out with is some kind of a recommendation on emeritus status for people who can no longer, participate. But that's not trying to open up a can of worms.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the kind of thing I would expect the TOB to be able to, come down from in propose horizontal management issues or governance issues down into the repos to make sure, which I guess is what the TOB's job is, right? To make sure that progress is
Tob.
being,
Oh, you're saying Tob. Sorry.
did I say TOB, I always forget which one it is.
Carry on. Okay, thanks for talking that through. If you have any other questions on that, that's fine. Ping me. Does anybody have any other topics particularly?
Nope.
Is anybody on the call going to the member summit next week? That guy. Good. I think it looked like there's a good agenda. I was glad to see all the folks that are speaking. And Phil, I hate to miss you, but it probably won't be enough to say that if we have stuff on the agenda, we'll probably still meet next week.
Yeah, no, you should.
Not quite the last couple of conferences that came through. So, okay. Well, if nobody has any other particular topics, then let's call it at a half hour.
I see a hands up by CJ.
Hey, would it be okay if next week we could bring the extension proposal? So there is an updated PR, and I've updated the issue on issue 111. That's the draft PR to the distribution spec that shows how the extensions can be implemented. We went through 2 rounds of iterations before I wanted to bring it to this call so that we have some confidence on the model. I think this is probably for next week. Just wanted to give a heads up so that we can maybe talk about that. Oh, okay.
Yeah, that link there's 2 links here, Sargon. There's let me get the distribution spec on. I'll put them in the HackMD if that's okay, Sargon. Hold on. The distribution issue 3512, Sajay, is the tracker you have for the proposal, but you have oh yeah, 3522. So is the draft. Okay, so Sargon, the three links are in the notes.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, everybody get 30 minutes back. Good seeing and hearing all of you.
Fantastic. See you.
Yep. Good to see you.
Makes sense. Cheers.
Thanks, folks.